Elara shivered, not from the early morning chill that seeped through the rough-hewn walls of her cabin, but from a deeper, more constant cold. Her fingers, thin and pale, tightened around the small wooden wolf clutched to her chest. The wolf's whisper, carving, smooth and worn from countless touches, its eyes mere indentations, felt like the only warm thing she possessed. It was a silent, secret comfort, a tangible link to a spirit she barely understood, a spirit her father called a curse. Outside, the Blackwood Pack lands were beginning to stir. The air, crisp and cold, carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth, familiar yet distant to her. She pictured the ancient, dense pine forests, the jagged, dark mountains that framed her world, a world she was never truly part of. Every morning brought the same ritual, the distant howls of the hunting party, the excited barks of younger wolves, the low rumble of Alpha Kale's command. These sounds, meant to signify unity and strength, only amplified her profound isolation. She pushed herself up, her joints protesting the cold, and moved towards the single, grimy window of her secluded cabin. The glass was blurred with condensation, mirroring the blur of her own existence. With a sigh, she wiped a small circle clear. Her breath fogged it immediately, but for a moment she saw it. The pack. They moved as one, a fluid, powerful force against the muted greens and browns of the awakening forest. Their movements were precise, their instincts sharp, their unity palpable. A pang, sharp and familiar, pierced her heart. It was an ache for inclusion, a yearning for belonging that she had never known, a hunger that gnawed at her soul. Her own reflection stared back from the glass, a slender build, often appearing fragile, with long, mousy brown hair that always seemed to tangle no matter how many times she tried to tame it. Her eyes, a striking shade of stormy gray, held a depth of ancient sorrow and an unspoken strength she was too afraid to acknowledge. A faint, almost invisible scar ran along her left cheekbone, a relic of a childhood accident her father often attributed to her weakness. She traced it with a finger, remembering his cold gaze, the words clumsy and useless, echoing even now. Every sunrise was a fresh reminder of her status, or lack thereof. While the pack wolves shifted with ease, embracing their primal forms, Elara felt nothing but an emptiness where her own wolf should be, or so she believed. The small wooden wolf in her hand, a secret gift from her estranged mother, whispered otherwise. It hummed faintly, a pulse she felt in her palm, a hidden warmth that was hers alone. Your wolf is different, Elara, her mother's voice, a faint, cherished memory, seemed to echo. Do not let them tell you otherwise. But them was her father, Alpha Kale, and his word was law. Alpha Kale. The thought of him sent a chill colder than any morning breeze through her. He was a towering figure, even from a distance, with a powerful, muscular build. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, caught the early light. His eyes, a piercing, icy blue, were constantly assessing, missing nothing, especially any hint of imperfection. His mouth was often set in a hard, unforgiving line, a permanent mark of his dominance. He bore the traditional alpha mark prominently on his bicep, a symbol of his unchallenged authority, a symbol that Elara had never been allowed to touch, much less earn. He ruled the Blackwood Pack with an iron fist, valuing strength and purity above all else. His love for his pack was twisted by his need for absolute control and a deep-seated fear of anything he could not understand or command. That fear, she knew, was largely directed at her. The distant sounds of the hunt grew louder, then began to recede, signaling their success. Soon the pack would return, triumphant and unified, their bellies full, their bonds strengthened. Elara would remain here, in her solitude, watching from the periphery. She always watched. It was a painful habit, an emotional self-flagellation. But she could not stop herself. She wanted to understand what she was missing, what made them whole and her incomplete. A low growl rumbled deep in her own chest, a sound born of frustration and despair, not of primal power. She longed to feel the earth beneath her paws, the wind in her fur, the thrill of the chase, the camaraderie of the hunt. Instead, she had this, the cold cabin, the worn carving, and the gnawing ache of an unfulfilled destiny. Her quiet exterior masked a storm of raw emotion, a torrent of self-doubt and desperate pleas for a power she sensed but could not wield. She remembered a time, long ago, when she was a child full of naive hope. She had tried to shift, hidden in the darkest parts of the forest, willing her wolf to emerge. She had concentrated until her head throbbed, until tears streamed down her face, until exhaustion claimed her. Nothing, only the quiet, mocking whispers of the wind. Each failure chipped away at her spirit, leaving her more fragile, more certain of her father's judgment. Today, however, felt different. There was a tension in the air, a subtle shift in the pack's usual rhythm that set her teeth on edge. The return from the hunt was not as boisterous as usual. A hushed anticipation seemed to hang over the scattered utilitarian cabins. The usual sounds of children playing and elders chatting conspicuously absent. Every member of the pack seemed drawn towards the Alpha's den, a formidable fortress carved into the rock, casting a long shadow over everything. Alara knew she should retreat, disappear into the anonymity of her cabin, but an irresistible pull kept her at the window. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of premonition. She clutched the carving tighter, its small form digging into her palm. Her breath hitched. What is happening? Then she saw him. Alpha Kale. He stood before the pack, his powerful frame dominating the space. His voice, usually a booming command, now carried an edge of cold fury that sliced through the crisp morning air. Every word he uttered was sharp, clipped, designed to assert his dominance, to quell any dissent, real or imagined. Weakness, he snarled, his voice carrying far beyond the immediate circle of wolves. I see weakness creeping into the very core of our pack, a stain on our purity, a rot that threatens to consume us all. Alara's stomach clenched. She knew, she always knew. His words were a familiar refrain, a song of condemnation she had heard countless times. But today, the intensity was sharper, the anger more palpable. The pack members shifted uneasily, their heads bowed, avoiding his piercing gaze. No one dared to meet his eye, to challenge the absolute authority that emanated from him. Our ancestors built this pack on strength, Alpha Kale continued, his voice rising, resonating with a gravelly timbre that vibrated through the ground. On an unwavering spirit, on wolves who know their place, who contribute, who are not a burden. A shiver ran down Alara's spine, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Her fingers locked around the wooden wolf, her knuckles white. She knew if she let go, she'd spill the fragile hope it represented. She knew who he was talking about. She always was. His eyes, icy blue and merciless, swept across the bowed heads of his pack. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift, they locked onto Alara's isolated cabin, directly at her window. Her breath caught in her throat. His gaze lingered, a silent accusation, a public condemnation delivered without a single spoken name. But the message was clear. It was for her. The raw emotion in his voice, the thinly veiled disgust, pierced her deeply. It was not just anger. It was a profound disappointment, a personal affront that she, his own daughter, was such a flaw in his perfect pack. He, the Alpha, the pinnacle of strength, could not tolerate this perceived defect in his own bloodline. Any wolf who cannot stand strong, who cannot contribute their full might, Alpha Kale declared, his voice dropping to a dangerous low growl, is a liability, a danger, and liabilities must be purged. The words echoed in the sudden, terrifying silence that followed. Purged. The word hung in the air, heavy and dark, a death knell to her already precarious existence. Alara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out beneath her. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, seeking some small solace in its unyielding surface. The fear she lived with daily, a dull, constant hum, now sharpened into a piercing scream inside her mind. Her father's gaze, those icy blue eyes, seemed to bore right through the cabin walls, through her very soul. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see the forbidden wolf her mother had spoken of, the secret power she had always tried to hide, the very thing he feared. A few pack members, bolder or perhaps crueler than others, risked a glance towards her cabin, their expressions a mix of pity and contempt. She imagined their whispers, their unspoken agreement with their alpha's words. Wolfless, weak, a burden. These were the labels that had defined her entire life within the Blackwood Pack. Alara slowly drew back from the window, her heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm. The wolf's whisper, carving felt heavy in her hand, suddenly less a comfort and more a burden, a reminder of the unique, dangerous truth within her. She moved away from the light, retreating into the dim corners of her cabin, the shadows of familiar embrace. The cold dread settled deep in her stomach, twisting into a knot of absolute certainty. Her father's harsh words, his pointed gaze, were not just a warning this time. They were a premonition, a dark, chilling whisper of her impending doom. She was no longer just an outsider, she was a target. Her time here in this solitary cabin on the fringes of the Blackwood Pack was running out. She closed her eyes, but the image of Kael's unforgiving face and the echo of his chilling words remained. The chilling words of Alpha Kael had wrapped around Alara like a shroud, leaving her in the cabin with a cold dread clinging to her skin. Each beat of her heart echoed the premonition of an impending doom, a future she could almost taste on the crisp, pine-scented air. She had spent the night tracing the worn lines of her wolf's whisper carving, the tiny wooden wolf a mute witness to her silent torment. Its smooth surface offered little comfort against the gnawing fear that tightened in her chest. A sharp rap on her door splintered the fragile quiet of dawn. It was a summons, delivered by a young male wolf with eyes that avoided hers. The pack gathering was called for midday, a formal assembly at the Alpha's den. Every pack member was expected. Her throat tightened, a dry knot of apprehension forming. This was not a request, it was a command, an inescapable pull toward the very fate she dreaded. She knew this was it. The air outside felt colder than usual, biting at her exposed hands as she stepped out. The familiar path to the Alpha's den now stretched before her like an executioner's walk. The Blackwood Pack lands, usually bustling with the energetic movements of wolves, seemed hushed. The dense pine forest stood silent, their needles holding a fresh dusting of frost. A thin gray mist hung low between the ancient trees, muffling sound and distorting shapes. Alara could feel the eyes of other pack members upon her. Not openly hostile, but heavy with a silent judgment she knew too well. They whispered among themselves, their voices low and indistinct, like the rustling of dry leaves. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, each crunch of pine needles beneath her worn boots a step closer to her inevitable public shame. Her stomach churned with a nauseous blend of fear and a strange, desperate hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, today would be different. Today her hidden wolf would finally stir, rise to the surface, and roar its presence for all to see. But the hope was a fragile thing, like a winter flower, easily crushed by the weight of years of disappointment. She held the small wooden wolf tight in her palm, its silent presence a small anchor in the storm of her anxiety. The scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke filled her nostrils, a smell that had once meant home, now only signaled an ending. The Alpha's den was not a welcoming place. Carved into the side of a jagged, dark mountain, its entrance yawned like a predator's maw. Inside, the cavernous space was already filled with the gathered pack, their bodies radiating a collective energy that felt both powerful and utterly alien to Alara. The air was thick with the musky scent of many wolves, a scent of belonging that had always eluded her. Torches flickered on the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that made the faces of her packmates seem even more severe, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. Alpha Kael stood on a raised platform at the far end of the den, his towering figure silhouetted against the flickering flames. His dark hair, streaked with silver, caught the light. His piercing, icy blue eyes swept over the assembled pack, lingering for a fraction of a second on Alara. That brief gaze felt like a physical blow, cold and dismissive. She shrank back slightly, pressing herself against the rough stone wall, trying to become invisible among the hundreds of watchful eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Today, Alpha Kael's voice boomed, resonating through the cavern, we reaffirm our loyalty. We honor the strength that defines the Blackwood Pack. His words carried the weight of unquestionable authority, silencing the last murmurs among the wolves. Alara felt a tremor run through the ground, a collective shiver of anticipation. This was the demonstration of loyalty ritual. She had witnessed it countless times from the periphery, always an outsider, always watching with a hollow ache in her chest. Each of you, Kael continued, his voice hardening, will step forward. You will shift. You will show your wolf. You will display the power that flows in your veins, the very essence of what makes us strong. A ripple of excitement, almost a low growl, moved through the pack. Young wolves puffed out their chests, eager to show their prowess. Older wolves stood with quiet confidence, their power a palpable aura around them. The first to step forward was Thomas, a robust young male known for his quick shifts and powerful build. He moved to the center of the clearing, his muscles tensing. A low growl rumbled in his throat, and with a sudden fluid motion, his human form dissolved into a magnificent, dark-furred wolf. Bones shifted with a sickening crunch that was also oddly graceful. His transformation was complete in mere seconds, leaving a powerful beast with glowing eyes and a sleek, muscular frame where the young man had stood. The pack let out an approving chorus of growls and barks. Alara watched, her breath catching in her throat. The sheer force of the transformation, the raw power emanating from Thomas's wolf form, was overwhelming. A wave of despair washed over her. How could her silent, hidden wolf ever compare to such a fierce, undeniable manifestation? She clutched the wooden carving tighter, her knuckles white. She wished she could melt into the stone, simply cease to exist. One after another, the pack members stepped forward. Emma, a swift huntress, shifted into a nimble gray wolf, her movements quick and silent as she demonstrated a hunting pounce. Sarah, a wise elder, transformed into a large, white wolf, her presence radiating calm authority and strength. The sounds of shifting bones, the guttural growls, the triumphant barks of the wolves filled the den. Each transformation was a spectacle of power, a testament to their lineage and their belonging. With each successful shift, the pit in Alara's stomach grew deeper, cold and heavy. Her hidden wolf, the one she felt deep within her core, remained stubbornly silent, a whispered secret that refused to roar. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to conjure it, to beg it to appear. Please, she pleaded silently, just this once. Show them, show Father. But there was only silence within her, a vast, echoing emptiness where her wolf should have been. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an excuse, a way out. Could she feign illness? Could she pretend to sprain an ankle and avoid the ritual? But Kael's eyes were like daggers, constantly sweeping the crowd, missing nothing. To refuse would be an even greater offense, a direct challenge to his authority, far worse than merely being wolfless. Her heart throbbed with an agonizing rhythm, each beat a painful reminder of her difference. The ranks thinned. The pack members who had shifted moved to stand proudly on the periphery, their wolf forms casting long, intimidating shadows. The air grew heavier with the scent of their power. Alara felt the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on her, an invisible burden that threatened to suffocate her. The whispers began again, louder this time, like the hiss of snakes. The Alpha's daughter. Still wolfless. A shame on us all. She heard snickers, low and cruel, cutting through the heavy air. Her face burned with humiliation, a hot flush spreading across her cheeks. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she willed them away. She would not cry, not here, not in front of them. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then came the inevitable. A voice, cold and sharp, sliced through the din. Alara Vance, her name, spoken by her father, sounded like a condemnation. It echoed in the cavern, drawing every eye to her. Her blood ran cold. The small wooden wolf carving felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a burden rather than a comfort. Her legs felt like stone, rooted to the spot. Her throat was bone dry, preventing any response. Alpha Kael's gaze was fixed on her, unwavering, filled with an icy contempt that pierced her to her very soul. It was the look of a predator disappointed by a weakling, not a father looking at his child. He made no effort to soften his expression, no hint of the warmth she sometimes yearned for. She knew this look. It was the look that had haunted her since childhood. Slowly, painfully, she forced her feet to move. Each step was an act of immense will, dragging herself across the stone floor toward the center of the den. The journey felt endless, a lifetime compressed into a few agonizing moments. The pack's sneers were palpable, their silent judgment of physical weight. She could feel their eyes burning holes through her, stripping away any last shred of dignity. She stopped in the center, directly before Alpha Kale. He stood tall and unmoving, his expression a mask of stern expectation. The flickering torchlight danced in his eyes, making them seem even colder, more distant. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to summon a strength she did not possess. Her inner wolf remained dormant, a phantom limb that refused to appear. "Shift, Ilara," Alpha Kale commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, a flat statement of fact. She tried, she truly did. She closed her eyes, focusing all her will, all her desperate longing. She imagined the sensation of fur sprouting, of bones shifting, of the wild power surging through her veins. She concentrated on the familiar thrumming deep within her, the faint echo of a primal spirit she knew was there, even if no one else could see it. She pushed, she pulled, she pleaded with her hidden essence. But nothing happened. Her human form remained stubbornly intact. No fur, no claws, no primal roar. Only the trembling of her own body, the frantic pounding of her heart, and the cold sweat beating on her forehead. She stood there, a fragile human girl, exposed and vulnerable, in a circle of powerful, expectant wolves. The silence in the den was absolute, thick with anticipation. Then slowly it morphed into a collective sigh of disappointment, a wave of subtle, disgusted murmurs. She opened her eyes, meeting her father's gaze. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a fury she had seen countless times before. But this time, it was different. This time, it was public. This time, there was no escaping the shame. Her cheeks flushed a deep, painful red, and she felt the hot tears finally escape, tracing cold paths down her face. The pack's whispers grew louder, bolder. "Wolfless, a burden, unfit." The words stung like whips, each one a confirmation of her deepest fears. She felt utterly worthless, a stain on the pack, a disappointment to her lineage. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth, and her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Alpha Kale watched her, his expression a mixture of profound disappointment and barely contained rage. He did not speak for a long moment, allowing the silence and the pack's judgment to settle, to fester. The weight of his silence was heavier than any shout. Ilara felt as though the very air had been sucked from her lungs, leaving her gasping. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the earth itself. Finally, Alpha Kale broke the suffocating silence. His voice was low, laced with bitter disappointment, each word a hammer blow to Ilara's already shattered spirit. "Such weakness," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the pack, then back to Ilara, "cannot be tolerated within the Blackwood pack." His words hung in the air, cold and final, leaving Ilara paralyzed with fear and shame. Stale wood and dust filled Ilara's small cabin, a tangible shroud around her spirit. The door clicked shut, a lock turning on her soul. Days blurred into a haze, each silent, each filled with aching abandonment. Her father's cold words still pinned her. Weakness, failure, a burden. Her trembling finger traced the wooden table, her gaze fixed on the small window, her only link outside. Through its grimy panes, she saw fragments of the pack life now denied. Distant children's laughter, light and carefree, carried on the crisp air. It was a painful melody of loss. She imagined their chase games, their hands reaching, forming bonds she only dreamed of. Her stomach tightened with a pang deeper than hunger, a longing for connection, a touch, a kind word beyond the alpha's condemnation. Her fingers sought the wolf's whisper carving, tucked deep in her pocket. Her only comfort in relentless solitude, its indented eyes held her sorrow. This forbidden wolf was a secret legacy, a fragile link to a mother she barely remembered, a mother who perhaps saw something in Ilara no one else did. Hours melted as Ilara remained by the window, her breath misting on the cold glass. She watched hunters return, their powerful forms moving with confidence. speaking of belonging. They carried fresh kills, faces flushed, camaraderie in every gesture and shouted greeting. She saw alpha marks on their arms, symbols of strength and loyalty she would never bear. Bitterness washed over her, then the sting of shame for such a thought. How could she, wolfless, hope to stand among them? Her mind was a tempest, a monologue offering no escape. "Why am I like this?" she whispered. "Why can I not be like them? Why does my wolf hide?" She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, its chill a distraction from the ache behind her eyes. The pack saw only weakness, frailty, her quiet nature. They did not see the storm within, the constant battle against inadequacy, the prayers for a sign she was truly one of them. Her father's glacial gaze during the ritual was constant torment. His words, "Such weakness cannot be tolerated," shattered her hope. They echoed, chipping at her resolve, leaving her hollow and fragile. She remembered the pack's sneers, their eyes sliding over her, seeing a void where a powerful wolf should be. The humiliation burned, a brand on her soul. She knew the pack law. A wolfless individual was a threat, a weakness compromising the pack. They drained resources, offered no protection, and defied the alpha's demand for strength. She was an anomaly, a quiet shadow in a world of might. Her slender build, tangled brown hair, and stormy gray eyes held ancient sorrow. None spoke of a warrior spirit like her brethren. A faint scar on her cheekbone, a childhood relic, often proved her weakness. When silence suffocated, she pressed her ear to the wall, straining for sounds outside. A distant howl, a short bark, leaves rustling. Each sound was a cruel reminder of the life she was excluded from, the pack she yearned for. She imagined communal meals, stories around fires, the warmth and belonging of their gatherings. A hot tear traced her cheek, tasting of salt and bitter regret. She paced her cabin, bare feet silent on the cold floor, her movements restless. Each step was heavy with unspoken questions, desperate pleas. "Show yourself," she begged her hidden wolf, clutching the carving until her knuckles whitened. "Prove them wrong, prove him wrong." She closed her eyes, reaching inward for the primal core she knew existed within her. She pictured a magnificent wolf emerging. All she found was an echo, a whisper, a silent presence that refused to manifest. The wolf's whisper. Carving felt warm, almost alive, in her palm. Her mother had given it years ago, a secret gift Alara guarded fiercely. "This wolf knows you, little one," her mother whispered, soft as a breeze. "It carries a strength only you understand." Those words were a fragile lifeline in her self-doubt. They were her lifeline against despair, a thread suggesting her father's judgment and the pack's scorn were not the truth. She recalled the day her mother gave it. Alara had been small, already feeling her father's disapproval, her difference. Her mother held her close, a rare tenderness, pressing the carving into her hand. "Never lose it," she said, her eyes like Alara's, filled with sorrow. "It is a part of you." Alara wondered what her mother had known, what she saw her father, the Alpha, ignored. Had her mother felt this silent spirit too? The sun descended, painting the sky orange and purple, casting long shadows. The air grew colder. Alara shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter. She watched distant lights flicker in the pack's dwellings, small beacons of life. Each light was a stab, a reminder of communal fires she would not share, stories she would not hear, a pack she was no longer part of. The cabin's silence deepened with night, amplifying her ragged breathing, her heart's frantic beat. Isolation's crushing weight grew in the darkness. No friendly faces, no comforting voices, only whispers of fear, the murmur of inadequacy. Her mind replayed her father's harsh words, pack members' dismissive glances, every perceived failure. It was a cruel, self-inflicted torment she could not stop. She imagined walking out into the night, slipping through trees, seeking freedom, a place her true self could emerge. The thought was fleeting, extinguished by cold reality. Where would she go? No wolf, no pack, no strength to survive the wilds alone. The world beyond Blackwood Pack lands was dangerous, unforgiving for one as vulnerable as her. Her father's warnings of outside dangers, laced with chilling certainty, kept them all controlled. Utter hopelessness settled, heavy and pervasive. She slid down the wall, collapsing to the cold floor, knees to her chest. Her hidden wolf felt like a cruel joke, a ghost, a myth, a figment of imagination. Perhaps her father was right. She was a flaw, an aberration, a wolfless burden. The thought poisoned her bones, chilling her inside out. Tears welled, blurring her tiny forgotten world. They were tears of sadness, frustration, deep anger at herself, her hidden wolf, the unfairness. She huddled long on the floor, the carving clutched, trembling with suppressed emotions. She allowed herself to feel the depth of pain, the agonizing loneliness, the bitter taste of rejection. It was a raw, visceral experience, stripping pretense, leaving her exposed. She longed for release, an end to torment, for anything to break the suffocating silence. As night deepened, pack sounds grew fainter, fading into wind rustle. The moon, a thin crescent, cast long shadows across her cabin floor. Alara pushed herself up, stiff and aching. She moved to her small cot, its straw mattress offering little comfort. Sleep was a restless escape, haunted by her father's disdain and the vibrant life denied her. She lay, staring at the dark ceiling, her mind racing, replaying the day's events, dissecting every word. Self-doubt was a relentless current, pulling her into despair. Will I ever be seen? She wondered, a silent whisper in the darkness. Will anyone understand what lies beneath this fragile skin? The carving remained clutched, a hard comfort. Its presence reminded her of her mother's belief, a tiny spark against darkness. Pale, weak morning light painted stripes on the cabin floor. Alara rose, her body heavy, eyes holding unshed tears. The routine etched itself. Wake, watch, despair, sleep, repeat. She moved with quiet resignation, her spirit bruised but not broken. Still a flicker of hope, a desperate plea for her hidden wolf to emerge and shatter worthlessness. She made her way back to the familiar window. The pack stirred, faint movements visible. Smoke curled from distant chimneys, promising warm meals and company. Pine and damp earth smelled stronger, invigorated by morning chill. She sighed, a shaky breath that did little to ease the tightness in her chest. She yearned for the wind on her face, the undergrowth beneath her paws, the exhilarating rush of the hunt. These were sensations known only in dreams, tantalizing, always beyond her grasp. A distant bark, sharp and clear, cut the quiet air. It was communication, warning, territory. It reminded her of pack life, a tapestry of instinct and duty she was torn from. She watched a young male, perhaps Thomas, her age, walk past. His head was high, movements fluid and confident. He carried a small axe towards the woodpile, his purpose clear. Alara felt envy, not for the axe, but for his purpose, his unquestioning role within the pack. Her father, Alpha Kael, valued strength above all. His rule was absolute, his will unquestioned. He built his pack into a formidable force, commanding respect and fear. His piercing, icy blue eyes missed nothing. His authoritative voice boomed, silencing dissent. He saw her as a stain, a weakness he could not tolerate. His own daughter. The thought was a fresh wound, bleeding with each moment of isolation. A sudden movement caught her eye. A figure approached, moving with a purposeful stride. It was a young male, James, one of the hunters she recognized. His face was unreadable, but his grim posture sent anxiety through Alara. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum. She rarely received visitors, not since her public humiliation. Her confinement was absolute, a silent pack agreement to forget her existence. He stopped at her door, boots crunching softly on the frozen earth. Alara froze, breath caught. She felt tremor in her hands, her body tense with dread and a faint hope. Perhaps he brought reprieve, a chance to prove her worth, to redeem herself to her father. But a colder voice whispered such hope was foolish, a dangerous delusion. A sharp rap broke the silence, echoing loudly in the cabin. Alara flinched, her body tensing. She hesitated, clutching the wolf's whisper carving, its smooth surface an anchor in her rising fear. She had to answer. It was a summons. Ignoring it would worsen her precarious situation. She slowly crossed the room, each step heavy with unspoken weight. Her fingers brushed the doorframe before she reached for the latch. Her hand trembled, a visible tremor she tried to control. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart, steeling herself for whatever news awaited her. The door creaked open, revealing the young messenger. His face was grim, his eyes avoiding hers as he delivered his message. His mouth set in a tight line, betraying palpable discomfort. He did not meet her gaze, a clear sign of ill news. He spoke, his voice low but clear, carrying his Alpha's cold authority. Alara Vance, Alpha Kale requests your presence in the council chamber. Immediately. The words hung, heavy and final. Alara felt a chill seep into her bones, deeper than the morning cold. It was not a request, but an order. Her mind raced, grasping explanations, but only one terrible truth presented itself. This was it, the reckoning. This summons, solemn, felt like a death knell, silencing the fragile hope within her lonely cabin. A grim summons had been a whisper, yet it echoed through Alara's cabin like the toll of a funeral bell. Each beat of her heart hammered out a rhythm of foreboding. The messenger's face, etched with practiced neutrality, had confirmed the cold dread already pooling in her stomach. The heavy oak door of her solitary dwelling creaked shut behind her, sealing away the last vestiges of a life she never truly owned. She walked the familiar path toward the Alpha's den, her steps unnaturally light, as if her body refused to acknowledge the weight of her impending fate. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that usually brought a faint comfort, now seemed to mock her. This was the smell of home, a home that was about to cast her out. Her breath hitched in her throat, a tiny sound that felt like a silent scream inside her chest. The sky above was a bruised gray, mirroring the landscape of her soul. Each gnarled tree, each jagged rock face, was a silent witness to her journey. She gripped the small, intricately carved wooden wolf, the wolf's whisper carving, hidden deep within her cloak pocket. Its smooth surface was a familiar anchor against the rising tide of panic. Her mother's gift, a secret promise of what she truly was, felt both a source of strength and a cruel reminder of her current powerlessness. The Alpha's den, carved into the solid rock, loomed ahead, a formidable fortress of cold stone and ancient authority. Its entrance yawned like a predator's maw, ready to consume her. Her throat felt tight, a band of fear constricting her breath. She could feel the stares of the few pack members she passed, their eyes averted quickly. The judgment was palpable, a phantom touch on her skin. She was already an outcast, a shadow. This walk was merely the formal declaration. A pair of burly guards, their faces impassive, stood at the entrance to the council chamber. They stepped aside without a word, their silence heavier than any accusation. The chamber itself was a cavernous space, carved from the living rock, its walls unadorned and cold. Torches flickered in sconces, casting dancing shadows that deepened the sense of oppressive gloom. The air hung thick and heavy, laden with unspoken judgments in the scent of damp stone. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat Alpha Kale Blackwood. His imposing form against the rough-hewn backdrop seemed larger than life. His dark hair, streaked with silver, framed a face set in a hard, unforgiving line. His icy blue eyes, sharp as winter shards, bore into her without mercy, without even a flicker of recognition for the daughter he had once cradled. He looked not at Alara, but through her, at an inconvenient truth he was determined to erase. Around the chamber, a handful of senior pack members sat on stone benches. Their expressions ranged from grim acceptance to outright disdain. They were the Alpha's council, the pillars of the Blackwood pack, and their silent presence amplified the weight of the moment. Alara felt their collective gaze, 1,000 invisible needles pricking her skin. She kept her own gaze fixed on a point just beyond her father's shoulder, a meaningless spot on the wall, anything to avoid meeting his gaze or the condemning eyes of the council. Her fingers locked around the wolf's whisper carving, the dark wood digging into her palm. She knew if she let go, if she relaxed her grip even for a second, she might crumble entirely. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Alpha Kale finally spoke. His voice, deep and gravelly, resonated off the stone walls, devoid of any warmth or familial connection. It was the voice of a judge, cold and absolute. Alara Vance, he began, his tone flat. You stand before the council of the Blackwood Pack. accused not by deed, but by nature. Each word was a deliberate hammer blow, striking at the fragile edifice of her composure. She could feel her breath catching, a tiny, desperate flutter in her throat. Her eyes welled, but she willed the tears away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her weakness. For too long, Alpha Kale continued, his voice rising slightly, you have been a shadow in our midst, a constant question mark against the purity and strength of our lineage. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the council, soliciting their silent agreement. They nodded, their faces unmoving like ancient statues. A cold knot formed in Alara's stomach, tightening with each passing second. The ancient laws of the pack are clear, he recited, his voice gaining a chilling, almost ritualistic cadence. Our strength lies in our wolf. It is the core of our being, the fire in our blood, the spirit that binds us as one. Without it, there is no place within the pack. Without it, there is only weakness, only vulnerability. Ilara's mind screamed in protest. I have a wolf. I feel it. Deep inside. It is just different. But the words remained trapped behind her clenched teeth, choked by fear and the absolute certainty that they would fall on deaf ears. Her father would never understand. He saw only what he expected to see, a void where there should have been a powerful wolf. Alpha Kale's eyes narrowed, pinning her. The wolfless, he pronounced, the word a brand, are a burden. They consume resources without contributing to the hunt. They weaken the scent of the pack, making us vulnerable to our enemies. They are a threat to our survival, a blight upon our sacred traditions. A faint tremor ran through Alara's slender frame. She felt as though the very air had been sucked from the room. His words were not just an accusation. They were a death sentence for her belonging, a complete erasure of her existence within the only world she had ever known. She tasted the bitter tang of copper in her mouth, the metallic taste of despair. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, though its authority remained undiminished. Pack law dictates that such a weakness cannot be tolerated. For the good of the many, for the strength and future of the Blackwood Pack, this aberration must be removed. His eyes, cold as glaciers, held no trace of paternal affection, only a brutal, unyielding resolve. Alara's world began to tilt. The flickering torchlight seemed to swim before her eyes. Each breath became a conscious effort, a fight against the invisible weight pressing down on her chest. She felt a profound sense of isolation. A chasm opened up between her and every living soul in that chamber. She was utterly alone, stripped bare before their judgment. Therefore, Alpha Kale declared, his voice ringing with chilling finality, by the authority vested in me as Alpha of the Blackwood Pack and by the ancient laws that govern our kind, I hereby pronounce your banishment. The word hung in the air, a physical entity, sharp and cruel. Banishment. It was worse than she had imagined, worse than any public shaming. It was a complete severance, a tearing away. Her body stiffened, a cold shock radiating through her veins. It felt as if her very essence was being ripped from her. Your name, he continued, Alara Vance, is hereby stricken from the rolls of the Blackwood Pack. You are no longer one of us. You are no longer a daughter of this pack, nor a part of its future. You are exiled from these lands, effective immediately, never to return. The formal pronouncement hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The meticulous precision of his words, the complete lack of emotion, carved deeper than any blade. Her name, a part of her identity since birth, was now a hollow echo, stripped of all meaning within these walls. Never to return. The finality of it was a crushing weight. A single hot tear finally escaped, tracing a lonely path down her cold cheek. It felt like a betrayal to her resolve, yet she could not stop it. A deep, agonizing ache settled in the center of her chest, a hollow space where hope had once, however faintly, resided. Her world, small and constricted as it had been, was now shattered into a million pieces, scattered to the winds. The words, "You are no longer one of us," shattered Alara's world, leaving her reeling as guards stepped forward to escort her away. The guards' hands were firm on her arms, not quite bruising, but a stark reminder of her new reality. Alara's bundled belongings, a small canvas sack containing the Wolf's Whisper carving and a few worn changes of clothes, felt impossibly heavy in her other hand. Each step was a wrenching pull, dragging her away from the only world she had ever known. The earth beneath her worn boots, once a source of comfort, now felt cold and indifferent. It was the same earth, yet everything had changed. She walked in a pace, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, refusing to meet the stares of the pack members who lined the narrow trail. Their faces were a blur of judgment and morbid curiosity. She could feel their eyes, heavy and silent, boring into her back, whispering the words her father had screamed. Wolfless, weakness, outcast. The air was thick with their unspoken condemnation, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and conformity. She tried to swallow, but her throat was dry, raspy, as if all moisture had been wrung from her being. A profound emptiness bloomed in her chest, vast and cold. It was a physical ache, a hollowing out of the place where her sense of belonging once resided. Every tree they passed, every twisted root and patch of moss, was a monument to a life now shattered. The towering pines, their needles fragrant and sharp, had once been her silent companions. She remembered climbing their sturdy trunks as a child, imagining herself soaring above the pack, her hidden wolf finally free. Now their shadows seemed to mock her, long and accusing. She pressed her lips together, fighting the tremor that threatened to betray her fragile composure. They passed the old hunting grounds, a wide clearing where the pack honed their skills. She could almost hear the excited yelps of the young ones, the powerful snarls of the seasoned hunters. A sharp pang pierced her, a memory of a distant afternoon. Her father, Alpha Kale, had watched her attempt to shift during a training exercise, his icy blue eyes fixed on her small, trembling form. The other pups had easily transformed, their youthful wolves bounding with joyous energy. Alara had stood there, willing, begging, praying for her own wolf to emerge, for her bones to shift, for fur to sprout. Nothing, only the cold, biting wind, had answered her silent plea. Alpha Kale's disappointment had been a palpable weight, a suffocating blanket from which she never truly escaped. The memory tasted like ash in her mouth. She tightened her grip on her bundle, her knuckles white, the Wolf's Whisper carving, hidden deep within the fabric, felt warm against her palm, a tiny spark of rebellion in the vast cold. It was the only thing from her past that still held a promise of something more, something real. She remembered her mother's hands, warm and gentle, pressing the carving into her own small hand years ago, a secret passed between them. Your wolf is inside you, little one. Different, but strong. But her mother had been gone for years, her quiet words fading into the harsh reality of Alpha Kale's rule. Each familiar scent now carried the stawing of loss. The sharp tang of pine resin mingled with the earthy dampness of the forest floor, a scent that had always meant home, safety, the comforting presence of her pack. Now it was a reminder of what she was losing. The faint metallic scent of wolf fur carried on the breeze from the distant den pricked at her heart. She was being erased, severed from the very air they breathed. Her mind raced, replaying fragmented moments of her childhood, each one tainted by the shadow of her father's disapproval. She saw his face, hard and unyielding, whenever she failed to meet his impossible standards, whenever her unique nature shone through. She was a constant disappointment, a flaw in his perfect lineage. She remembered the way he would look at her, not with anger, but with a chilling detachment, as if she were a problem to be solved, not a daughter to be loved. His eyes, usually so intense, would glaze over when they landed on her as if she were invisible. This was the quiet cruelty that had shaped her, molding her into a timid shadow of her true self. She had learned early on to hide her thoughts, to keep her heart locked away, to never reveal the stirrings of a power she instinctively knew was different, perhaps even dangerous in their rigid world. Her secret had been her burden, a heavy cloak she wore constantly. The path began to narrow, the trees growing denser, their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out the Skawandai. The light grew dim, casting long, eerie shadows that danced with her despair. The guards, silent and stoic, pushed her forward with an almost imperceptible pressure. They did not speak, their faces impassive, yet Alara felt their judgment, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She was a broken thing, a stain on the pack's honor being scrubbed away. She pictured the small, isolated cabin she had called home for years, nestled on the outskirts of the Blackwood lands. It was a place of loneliness, yet it had been hers. A tiny sanctuary where she could let her guard down, where she could dream of a wolf that was uniquely her own. Now, even that meager comfort was gone. The thought left her breathless, a raw, exposed nerve. Where would she go? What would become of her? The vast, unknown world beyond the Blackwood border stretched before her, a terrifying abyss. Her chest ached with a pain so profound it felt as though her very soul was being torn in two. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the outlines of the trees, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her truly break. She tightened her grip on the wolf's whisper carving, its smooth surface a tiny anchor in the storm of her grief. It was her only tangible link to the hidden part of herself, the part her father could never see, the part that defied his rigid world. The familiar sense of her home pack began to dissipate, replaced by a colder, crisper air. The pine gave way to something else, a mix of unfamiliar foliage. The ground underfoot grew rockier, less forgiving. The trees became gnarled and ancient, their forms twisted as if by endless winds. This was the edge of her world, the barren stretch between Alpha Kael's domain and the wild, untamed lands beyond. The desolation mirrored the emptiness in her heart. A chilling wind whipped around her, tearing at her clothes, tugging at her hair. It carried with it the scent of wet stone, of moss, and something else, something she could not quite place. It was not the familiar scent of Blackwood, nor was it anything she had ever encountered in the small world she inhabited. This scent was deep, earthy, almost primal. It was a blend of ancient power and something wild, untamed, utterly unknown. It raised the hairs on her arms, sending a shiver down her spine that was not entirely from the cold. Her heart, which had been a dull, aching thud, now beat with a frantic, unbidden rhythm. The wind, once a mournful companion, suddenly dropped to an unsettling hush. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on Alara's shoulders as the border loomed closer. Her escorts, the two burly Blackwood guards who had been walking with grim, silent purpose, halted abruptly. Their heavy boots scraped against the frozen earth, and the sudden stop jolted Alara forward, nearly tripping her. She caught herself, her gaze fixed on the dense line of ancient pines that marked the boundary. A palpable change settled over the landscape, like a predator holding its breath just beyond sight. The guards, usually so stoic and unyielding, began to shift their weight, their eyes darting into the shadowed depths of the forest ahead. Their shoulders hunched imperceptibly, and their hands, calloused and scarred, drifted towards the hilts of their hunting knives. Alara had never seen them display such open wariness. The familiar, oppressive aura of the Blackwood pack, a constant presence in her life, seemed to recede, replaced by something else. It was a sensation she could not name, a prickle on her skin that was not simply the cold. The very air around them felt charged, as if an invisible current now flowed through the quiet woods. Alara watched one guard, Thomas, lick his lips, his gaze fixed on a particular cluster of gnarled oaks. His breathing, usually deep and even, became shallow, almost ragged. The other guard, Jack, a man whose face rarely betrayed emotion, now had a tight knot forming between his brows. His ears twitched, straining to catch a sound that Alara could not hear. She felt a strange tremor beneath her feet, a low, persistent thrumming that vibrated up through the soles of her worn boots. It was not the rumble of distant thunder, nor the familiar tremor of an animal stampede. This was deeper, more fundamental, a resonance that seemed to stir the very earth itself. It resonated inside her bones, a gentle, insistent vibration that felt both alien and strangely compelling. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if the ground itself was alive, breathing beneath her. The Blackwood pack's aura had always been sharp, cold, like the metallic tang of fear and the bitter taste of her father's disapproval. It was an energy of rigid control, of suppressed emotions and sharp, undeniable power. But this new hum was different. It felt ancient, like the slow pulse of a forgotten forest, rich with the scent of damp earth and unseen life. It carried a whisper of wildness that Blackwood territory had systematically purged from its control boundaries. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to identify the source of this peculiar energy. It was almost like a memory, a faint echo of something she had always searched for but never found. Her hidden wolf, dormant and silent for so long, seemed to stir within her, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth spreading through her chest. It was not a shift, not a growl, but a feeling of profound recognition, as if this new presence spoke directly to the untamed part of her soul. She shivered, not from cold, but from the novelty of the sensation. Her fingers locked around the wolf's whisper carving nestled in her pocket, the smooth wood suddenly feeling warmer against her palm. She squeezed it, a silent anchor in this moment of unsettling change. Jack let out a low growl, a sound more animal than human, his eyes still fixed on the unseen. Thomas mimicked him, a guttural sound of warning escaping his throat. They were not looking at Alara, no longer focused on their banished charge. Their attention was entirely consumed by the invisible force that had descended upon the border. Their fear was a tangible thing, a cold wave radiating outward, washing over Alara and making her stomach clench. But beneath the fear, a different current flowed through her, a current of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Then it came, a sound that tore through the stillness of the forest, ripping apart the heavy silence like ancient cloth. It was a howl, yes, but unlike any howl Alara had ever heard from her own pack. Blackwood howls were territorial, sharp, often laced with aggression or sorrow. They were the sounds of wolves who knew their place, who understood the rigid hierarchy of their world. This howl was something else entirely. It started low, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to rise from the very roots of the trees. It built slowly, gaining power, becoming a mournful, defiant cry that echoed through the skeletal branches of the border pines. It swelled, powerful and untamed, a sound of raw, primal energy that vibrated in Alara's very core. It spoke of vast, open spaces, of an untamed spirit, of a loneliness so profound it transcended mere existence. There was an ancient wisdom embedded in its notes, a knowing sorrow and an undeniable, unyielding strength. It was a sound that both promised danger and whispered of belonging. The howl seemed to carry the scent she had noticed earlier, the mix of ancient power and something wild, unknown. It was the smell of damp earth after a long rain, of moss-covered stones, of blooming night jasmine, and something else indescribable, something electric and alive. It filled her lungs, a heady, intoxicating aroma that pushed away the stale scent of fear clinging to her clothes from days of banishment. The very air around her seemed to shimmer, the leaves on the trees swaying even though there was no discernible breeze. Alara's breath hitched in her throat. A shiver traced a path down her spine, a strange blend of terror and exhilaration. Her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. The Blackwood guards froze completely, their bodies rigid, their faces pale beneath their dark furs. Thomas dropped his bundle of meager belongings, the thud of it against the frozen ground sounding impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed the howl's fade. His hands were now entirely on his knife, his knuckles white. Jack, the more stoic of the two, slowly drew his weapon. The glint of steel in the dim forest light was a stark contrast to the mystical, almost ethereal quality of the fading howl. He did not look at Alara. His entire focus was on the impenetrable wall of trees before them. His lips moved, forming a silent curse or a prayer. Alara could not tell which. The fear emanating from them was a stark reminder of their vulnerability, their training seemingly unable to prepare them for such an ancient, powerful sound. Alara felt a pull, a strange magnetic force drawing her towards the source of that primal cry. It was terrifying, yes, because everything she had ever known about her world warned her against the unknown. Her father's lessons, the pack's fear of anything different, all screamed at her to recoil, to hide. But there was also an unbidden curiosity, a nascent spark of wonder that flickered to life within her. It was a feeling she had suppressed for so long, a desire for something more than the cold, hard reality of her existence. What kind of creature could produce such a sound? What kind of pack would claim this kind of wild power? Her mind raced, picturing massive wolves with eyes like ancient embers, their fur thick and dark as the deepest night. This was not the domesticated, controlled power of the Blackwood Pack. This was something untamed, something that whispered of forgotten legends and hidden truths. It felt like the embodiment of the secret strength she had always sensed within herself, the one her father had so desperately tried to extinguish. The guards exchanged nervous glances, their eyes wide and fearful. Their silent communication was clear. They were in danger, caught between the harsh mandate of their alpha and an unknown, powerful force. Their grip tightened on their weapons, the small movements a desperate attempt to assert control over a situation that was rapidly slipping away from them. Alara's heart pounded, a chaotic symphony of terror and a nascent, unbidden curiosity. She stared into the dark woods, waiting for whatever ancient power had called out to them to finally reveal itself. The biting wind, a constant companion since leaving the familiar Blackwood lands, now sharpened its edge, slicing through Alara's thin shawl. It carried the lingering, unsettling scent from beyond the border, a primal, untamed fragrance that spoke of ancient forests and wild, unfettered power. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, echoing the uneasy silence that had fallen over the guards. Their initial bravado had evaporated, replaced by a tense vigilance, their eyes scanning the dense, shadowy trees that marked the edge of their territory. She could feel the subtle tremor in the earth, a faint, rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through her very bones, a sensation entirely alien to the solid, predictable ground of her father's domain. It was a hum, almost a whisper, that pulled at something deep inside her, a longing she could not name. Then a new presence pierced the air, thick and oppressive, smothering the faint whispers of the forest. The guards stiffened further, their bodies straightening to rigid attention. A hush fell, deeper than before, as if the very trees held their breath. From the winding path behind them, shrouded in the deepening twilight, emerged Alpha Kyle, a towering shadow against the fading light. His footsteps on the pine needles were unnervingly silent, yet his presence throbbed with an undeniable, cold authority that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Alara's breath hitched. She hadn't dared to hope he might spare her this final indignity, but a tiny, foolish part of her had wished to simply vanish into the wilderness, forgotten and unmourned. Now his grim silhouette confirmed her worst fears. He wanted to witness her expulsion, to ensure the severance was absolute. His face, etched with lines of harsh displeasure, was a mask of unyielding finality, devoid of any warmth she might have once imagined. His eyes, icy blue, met hers across the short distance, and in their depths, she saw not anger, but a chilling disdain, a profound disappointment that cut deeper than any rage. She clutched the wolf's whisper carving tighter in her hand, the smooth, dark wood a small comfort against the sudden, overwhelming chill. "So you are still here," Alpha Kale's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and resonant, a sound designed to command and to wound. It was the same tone he used when condemning a stray or a trespasser, a stranger, never a daughter. He approached slowly, his gaze sweeping over Alara, then over the silent, watchful guards. "I wish to ensure this task was completed without incident." His words hung in the cold air, a thinly veiled threat to anyone who might hesitate in their duty. Alara felt her shoulders slump, a wave of profound weariness washing over her. She knew what was coming. This was not merely her banishment. This was the final public disavowal, the severing of any remaining thread that might have bound them. She swallowed, her throat dry and constricted, the metallic tang of fear sharp on her tongue. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver. But it was not from the wind alone. It was the coldness of his gaze, the utter absence of recognition, of paternal connection. She was merely a problem to be solved, a weakness to be excised. He stopped just a few paces from her, his imposing figure casting a long shadow that seemed to engulf her completely. The scent of pine and damp earth mixed with his own familiar, sharp aroma, a scent of dominance and cold, hard rock. "Alara," he began, his voice dropping slightly, though no less cutting, "you have proven yourself a burden, a constant reminder of what cannot be tolerated in this pack. His words were not a question, nor an accusation. They were a decree, an unchangeable truth in his eyes. Her vision blurred, a sheen of tears forming, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. She tried to steady her breath, to find some shred of dignity, but her body trembled involuntarily. Her fingers locked around the wolf's whisper carving, its familiar texture a small anchor in the storm of her despair. She could feel the faint tremor of her own heartbeat in her fingertips, a desperate rhythm against the wood. "You have no wolf," he continued, his voice devoid of any emotion, a flat statement of fact that had haunted her every waking moment. "You have no strength. You are a hollow shell, a risk to our purity, a danger to our very survival." Each word was a stone hurled directly at her, meant to crush her spirit into dust. A daughter should be a source of pride, a testament to her lineage. You are nothing but a disappointment. The words struck her with physical force. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp that died before it could escape. Disappointment. That was all she had ever been to him. Not a child, not a person, just a flaw in his perfect bloodline, a stain on his reputation. The scar on her cheek, a faint line from a childhood fall, suddenly burned, a tangible mark of her perceived imperfection. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fleeting second, trying to banish the image of his unyielding face, the piercing blue eyes that saw only her failures. When she opened them, her vision was truly blurred by tears, hot and stinging now, finally escaping. They traced cold paths down her cheeks, mingling with the even colder wind. She could taste the salt on her lips, a bitter testament to her utter desolation. She was a ghost in her own life, an echo that had never found its voice. This was it then, the final brutal cut, the severance of everything, even the pretense of a familial bond. He was not just banishing her from the pack, he was banishing her from his heart, from his memory, as if she had never truly existed. "This pack requires strength," Alpha Kale declared, his voice rising slightly, now addressing the silent guards in the unseen, watchful forest. "It demands loyalty, and it demands a wolf. You possess none of these." He turned his gaze back to Alara, his lips thin, a cold, hard line. "You are an anomaly, a flaw, and this pack has no place for flaws." She wanted to speak, to scream, to beg for just 1 ounce of understanding, one flicker of human warmth. But the words were trapped, suffocated by the knot of despair in her chest. What could she say? How could she argue with a man who had never seen her, only the absence of what he believed she should be? She had tried, oh how she had tried, to be what he wanted, to find the wolf that hid deep within her, to prove her worth, but it was never enough. She was never enough. A profound sense of emptiness settled over her, heavy and absolute. She felt hollowed out, as if every ounce of hope, every dream, had been meticulously scooped out, leaving only a vast, echoing void. The world around her seemed to tilt, the trees swaying menacingly, the ground beneath her feet feeling suddenly unstable. She was on the precipice, not just of the border, but of an endless, terrifying unknown. No home, no family, no purpose, just the bleak, cold expanse of the wilderness ahead. Alpha Kale's gaze hardened, his patience clearly at an end. "This is finished," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. He gestured towards the border, a dismissive flick of his hand. "Push her across. Let her find her own way, or let the forest claim her. She is no longer ours." The guards, who had been standing rigid and silent, now moved. 2 of them stepped forward, their expressions grim, their hands already reaching for her. Their movements were swift, practiced, the actions of men carrying out a disagreeable but necessary duty. Alara flinched, a small, involuntary movement of pure terror. Their touch would be the final seal, the definitive act of her expulsion. She could feel the rough fabric of their uniform sleeves as their hands closed around her arms, firm and unyielding. The pressure on her biceps was immediate, a strong, impersonal grip that threatened to bruise. Her breath hitched again, a tiny, desperate sound. This was it, the ultimate rejection. the physical act of being cast out, propelled into the desolate wild. She closed her eyes one last time, a tear escaping to trail warmly down her cheek. She was utterly broken, without hope, a fragile thing about to be tossed aside like refuse. The wolf's whisper, carving bit into her palm, a small, sharp pain, a final reminder of the secret she had failed to protect, the power she could not wield. She braced herself for the push, the fall, the final plunge into oblivion. Just as the guards began to exert pressure, preparing to force her across the invisible line, a sound ripped through the tense silence. It was deep, resonant, and utterly unexpected. A voice that seemed to rise from the very earth itself, rich and powerful, cutting through the cold air with an undeniable authority that stopped everyone cold. The biting wind, a constant companion since leaving the familiar Blackwood lands, now sharpened its edge, slicing through Alara's thin shawl. It carried the lingering, unsettling scent from beyond the border, a primal, untamed fragrance that spoke of ancient forests and wild, unfettered power. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, echoing the uneasy silence that had fallen over the guards. Their initial bravado had evaporated, replaced by a tense vigilance, their eyes scanning the dense, shadowy trees that marked the edge of their territory. She could feel the subtle tremor in the earth, a faint rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through her very bones, a sensation entirely alien to the solid, predictable ground of her father's domain. It was a hum, almost a whisper, that pulled at something deep inside her, a longing she could not name. Then a new presence pierced the air, thick and oppressive, smothering the faint whispers of the forest. The guards stiffened further, their bodies straightening to rigid attention. A hush fell deeper than before, as if the very trees held their breath. From the winding path behind them, shrouded in the deepening twilight, emerged Alpha KL, a towering shadow against the fading light. His footsteps on the pine needles were unnervingly silent, yet his presence throbbed with an undeniable, cold authority that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Alara's breath hitched. She hadn't dared to hope he might spare her this final indignity, but a tiny, foolish part of her had wished to simply vanish into the wilderness, forgotten and unmourned. Now his grim silhouette confirmed her worst fears. He wanted to witness her expulsion, to ensure the severance was absolute. His face, etched with lines of harsh displeasure, was a mask of unyielding finality, devoid of any warmth she might have once imagined. His eyes, icy blue, met hers across the short distance, and in their depths she saw not anger, but a chilling disdain, a profound disappointment that cut deeper than any rage. She clutched the wolf's whisper carving tighter in her hand, the smooth, dark wood a small comfort against the sudden, overwhelming chill. "So you are still here," Alpha Kale's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and resonant, a sound designed to command and to wound. It was the same tone he used when condemning a stray or a trespasser, a stranger, never a daughter. He approached slowly, his gaze sweeping over Alara, then over the silent, watchful guards. "I wish to ensure this task was completed without incident." His words hung in the cold air, a thinly veiled threat to anyone who might hesitate in their duty. Alara felt her shoulders slump, a wave of profound weariness washing over her. She knew what was coming. This was not merely her banishment. This was the final public disavowal, the severing of any remaining thread that might have bound them. She swallowed, her throat dry and constricted, the metallic tang of fear sharp on her tongue. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver, but it was not from the wind alone. It was the coldness of his gaze, the utter absence of recognition, of paternal connection. She was merely a problem to be solved, a weakness to be excised. He stopped just a few paces from her, his imposing figure casting a long shadow that seemed to engulf her completely. The scent of pine and damp earth mixed with his own familiar, sharp aroma, a scent of dominance in cold, hard rock. "Alara," he began, his voice dropping slightly, though no less cutting. "You have proven yourself a burden, a constant reminder of what cannot be tolerated in this pack." His words were not a question, nor an accusation. They were a decree, an unchangeable truth in his eyes. Her vision blurred, a sheen of tears forming, but she refused to let them fall, not yet. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. She tried to steady her breath, to find some shred of dignity, but her body trembled involuntarily. Her fingers locked around the wolf's whisper carving, its familiar texture a small anchor in the storm of her despair. She could feel the faint tremor of her own heartbeat in her fingertips, a desperate rhythm against the wood. "You have no wolf," he continued, his voice devoid of any emotion, a flat statement of fact that had haunted her every waking moment. "You have no strength. You are a hollow shell, a risk to our purity, a danger to our very survival." Each word was a stone hurled directly at her, meant to crush her spirit into dust. A daughter should be a source of pride, a testament to her lineage. "You are nothing but a disappointment." The words struck her with physical force. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp that died before it could escape. Disappointment. That was all she had ever been to him. Not a child, not a person, just a flaw in his perfect bloodline, a stain on his reputation. The scar on her cheek, a faint line from a childhood fall, suddenly burned, a tangible mark of her perceived imperfection. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fleeting second, trying to banish the image of his unyielding face, the piercing blue eyes that saw only her failures. When she opened them, her vision was truly blurred by tears, hot and stinging now, finally escaping. They traced cold paths down her cheeks, mingling with the even colder wind. She could taste the salt on her lips, a bitter testament to her utter desolation. She was a ghost in her own life, an echo that had never found its voice. This was it then, the final brutal cut. The severance of everything, even the pretense of a familial bond. He was not just banishing her from the pack. He was banishing her from his heart, from his memory, as if she had never truly existed. "This pack requires strength," Alpha Kale declared, his voice rising slightly, now addressing the silent guards and the unseen watchful forest. "It demands loyalty, and it demands a wolf. You possess none of these." He turned his gaze back to Alara, his lips thin, a cold, hard line. "You are an anomaly, a flaw, and this pack has no place for flaws." She wanted to speak, to scream, to beg for just 1 ounce of understanding, one flicker of human warmth. But the words were trapped, suffocated by the knot of despair in her chest. What could she say? How could she argue with a man who had never seen her, only the absence of what he believed she should be? She had tried, oh how she had tried, to be what he wanted, to find the wolf that hid deep within her, to prove her worth. But it was never enough. She was never enough. A profound sense of emptiness settled over her, heavy and absolute. She felt hollowed out, as if every ounce of hope, every dream, had been meticulously scooped out, leaving only a vast, echoing void. The world around her seemed to tilt, the trees swaying menacingly, the ground beneath her feet feeling suddenly unstable. She was on the precipice, not just of the border, but of an endless, terrifying unknown. No home, no family, no purpose, just the bleak, cold expanse of the wilderness ahead. Alpha Kale's gaze hardened, his patience clearly at an end. "This is finished," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. He gestured towards the border, a dismissive flick of his hand. "Push her across. Let her find her own way, or let the forest claim her. She is no longer ours." The guards, who had been standing rigid and silent, now moved. 2 of them stepped forward, their expressions grim, their hands already reaching for her. Their movements were swift, practiced, the actions of men carrying out a disagreeable but necessary duty. Alara flinched, a small, involuntary movement of pure terror. Their touch would be the final seal, the definitive act of her expulsion. She could feel the rough fabric of their uniform sleeves as their hands closed around her arms, firm and unyielding. The pressure on her biceps was immediate, a strong, impersonal grip that threatened to bruise. Her breath hitched again, a tiny, desperate sound. This was it, the ultimate rejection, the physical act of being cast out, propelled into the desolate wild. She closed her eyes one last time, a tear escaping to trail warmly down her cheek. She was utterly broken, without hope, a fragile thing about to be tossed aside like refuse. The wolf's whisper, carving bit into her palm, a small, sharp pain, a final reminder of the secret she had failed to protect, the power she could not wield. She braced herself for the push, the fall, the final plunge into oblivion. Just as the guards began to exert pressure, preparing to force her across the invisible line, a sound ripped through the tense silence. It was deep, resonant, and utterly unexpected. A voice that seemed to rise from the very earth itself, rich and powerful, cutting through the cold air with an undeniable authority that stopped everyone cold. A deep, resonant voice had cut through the tense silence, stopping everyone cold. The words hung in the frigid air, not a question, but a declaration, a force that seemed to ripple through the very ground beneath Alar's feet. Her breath caught in her throat, a small, desperate sound lost in the sudden, absolute stillness. The guard's hands, which had been poised to shove her across the desolate border, froze in midair, their fingers still brushing her tattered cloak. They looked like statues carved from fear, their faces pale in the fading light. Alara felt the phantom touch of their impending push, but it was the voice that truly held her captive. It was low, an ancient rumble that spoke of forgotten forests and hidden strengths, carrying an authority that was both commanding and strangely calm. It was a sound that both terrified her and drew her in, an echo of something deep within herself she had never dared to name. Her eyes, wide and stinging from unshed tears, instinctively darted toward the dense woods on the other side of the boundary line, the very place she was meant to be cast into. The pine trees stood like dark sentinels, their needles catching the last weak rays of the sun, creating long, distorted shadows that danced with the whispering wind. From between those ancient trunks, a figure emerged. He moved with a silent grace that belied his powerful build, his form coalescing from the deepening twilight. Alpha Reese Shadowfen stepped into the clearing, his presence radiating an immense, almost palpable power that pushed back against the oppressive aura of Alpha Kael's pack. It was like the sudden rush of cold, clear water against a parched throat, startling and invigorating all at once. He was tall and lean, with the coiled strength of a predator. Yet there was a stillness about him, a quiet intensity that commanded attention without a single shouted word. His dark, unruly hair fell across his brow, framing a face that was both rugged and refined. But it was his eyes that held Alara spellbound. They were forest green, deep and knowing, and as they swept across the stunned faces of Kael's guards, they seemed to strip away all pretense, all false bravado. They held an unnerving calm, a wisdom that felt centuries old. Alara's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest. She felt a strange buzzing sensation, a thrumming in her bones that resonated with the very air around this formidable newcomer. The cold wind that had been biting at her skin now seemed to carry a different scent, an intoxicating mix of wild sage, damp earth, and something undeniably wolf, yet unlike any she had ever known from her own pack. It was a scent that stirred a forgotten corner of her soul, a primal recognition that whispered of kinship and belonging. Reese's gaze finally, inevitably, locked onto hers. It was a moment that stretched into an eternity, obliterating the world around them. In those intense green eyes, Alara saw not the usual pity or scorn, not the fear or revulsion that had been her constant companions. Instead, there was a flicker of something else, something profound and unreadable, a recognition that pierced through her layers of pain and self-doubt. It was as if he saw not the wolfless girl, the exiled daughter, but something far deeper, something within her that even she barely dared to acknowledge. A tiny, fragile tendril of hope, something she thought had been utterly crushed moments before, unfurled within her. It was a dangerous, exhilarating feeling, a spark in the vast darkness of her despair. She wanted to look away, to hide from the intensity of his gaze, but she couldn't. His eyes held hers with an undeniable pull, a silent conversation passing between them that transcended words. A faint, almost predatory smirk played on his lips, hinting at a hidden wildness beneath his controlled exterior, a challenge to the established order. The silence that had fallen over the border grew heavy, laden with unspoken questions and simmering tension. Alpha Kale, who had stood rigid and commanding only moments before, now seemed to sag slightly. His icy blue eyes narrowed in confusion and barely concealed rage. The guards remained frozen, their hands still hovering near Alara, caught between their Alpha's last command and this new, unexpected authority. They could feel it too, the power emanating from Reese, a force unlike any they had encountered before. Reese took another slow, deliberate step forward, his boot falls silent on the pine needles. The movement was minimal, yet it commanded the attention of every soul present. He did not raise his voice, did not need to. His next words were spoken with a quiet conviction that resonated through the very earth, a declaration that felt as ancient and unyielding as the mountains themselves. His voice, calm and resonant, sliced through the strained atmosphere like a sharpened blade. "She is mine now," he stated, his voice carrying an undeniable authority that brooked no argument. Each word was a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and disbelief across the clearing. Alara flinched, not from fear, but from the sheer unexpectedness of his claim. Her mind struggled to comprehend. Mine? She belonged to no one, had been cast out, deemed worthless. Yet this powerful stranger spoke of possession, of belonging in a way that felt less like ownership and more like protection. He paused for a heartbeat, his gaze never leaving Alara's, a subtle message passing between them, a promise perhaps, or a simple acknowledgement. Then his eyes flickered to Alpha Kale, a brief, dismissive glance that contained more challenge than any roar. "She belongs to the Shadowfen pack." The finality of his statement hung in the air, a definitive boundary drawn not just between packs, but between Alara's past and her unforeseen future. Alara felt a dizzying sensation, as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. One moment she was an outcast, a burden to be cast aside, and the next she was claimed. Not just claimed, but declared to belong to an entirely different pack, by an alpha king whose very presence radiated ancient, untamed power. It was a rescue, a defiance, a bewildering twist of fate that made her head swim. Her entire life had been defined by rejection, by being wolfless, by the bitter taste of her father's scorn. Now, a man she had never seen before, an alpha of a rival territory, had chosen her. He had seen something, sensed something that her own blood had denied. A fragile, desperate hope blossomed in her chest, intertwining with the lingering tendrils of fear. Could this be real? Could anyone truly want her, the girl deemed worthless? The warmth of his gaze, the quiet strength in his voice, suggested that he did. A stunned silence descended upon the border, heavier and more profound than before. The guards of the Blackwood pack, who had been ready to execute their alpha's cruel command, stood utterly motionless, their eyes darting between their own fuming alpha and the enigmatic Alpha Reese. Their fear was palpable, a cold sweat beating on their brows. They understood the gravity of this challenge, the direct affront to Alpha Kale's authority. This was not merely a rescue, it was an act of war, a blatant disregard for established pack law and territory. Alpha Kale's face, which had been a mask of cold finality moments earlier, twisted in a mixture of shock and fury. His jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle pulsed violently in his cheek. His icy blue eyes, usually so commanding, were now wide with disbelief, unable to comprehend this audacious challenge to his absolute power, this direct intervention in his long-planned act of vengeance against his daughter. He had envisioned a simple, humiliating banishment, a definitive severance. Instead, he faced a rival Alpha King, standing tall and unyielding, effectively stealing his property, defying his will, and claiming what Kale had just cast away. The humiliation was searing, the challenge undeniable. He could not, would not accept it. The air crackled with the volatile tension of two dominant forces on the brink of collision. A deep, resonant voice had cut through the tense silence, stopping everyone cold. The words hung in the frigid air, not a question, but a declaration, a force that seemed to ripple through the very ground beneath Alara's feet. Her breath caught in her throat, a small, desperate sound lost in the sudden, absolute stillness. The guard's hands, which had been poised to shove her across the desolate border, froze in midair, their fingers still brushing her tattered cloak. They looked like statues carved from fear, their faces pale in the fading light. Alara felt the phantom touch of their impending push, but it was the voice that truly held her captive. It was low, an ancient rumble that spoke of forgotten forests and hidden strengths, carrying an authority that was both commanding and strangely calm. It was a sound that both terrified her and drew her in, an echo of something deep within herself she had never dared to name. Her eyes, widened, stinging from unshed tears, instinctively darted towards the dense woods on the other side of the boundary line, the very place she was meant to be cast into. The pine trees stood like dark sentinels, their needles catching the last weak rays of the sun, creating long, distorted shadows that danced with the whispering wind. From between those ancient trunks, a figure emerged. He moved with a silent grace that belied his powerful build, his form coalescing from the deepening twilight. Alpha Reese Shadowfen stepped into the clearing, his presence radiating an immense, almost palpable power that pushed back against the oppressive aura of Alpha Kale's pack. It was like the sudden rush of cold, clear water against a parched throat, startling and invigorating all at once. He was tall and lean, with the coiled strength of a predator. Yet there was a stillness about him, a quiet intensity that commanded attention without a single shouted word. His dark, unruly hair fell across his brow, framing a face that was both rugged and refined. But it was his eyes that held Alara spellbound. They were forest green, deep and knowing, and as they swept across the stunned faces of Kael's guards, they seemed to strip away all pretense, all false bravado. They held an unnerving calm, a wisdom that felt centuries old. Alara's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest. She felt a strange buzzing sensation, a thrumming in her bones that resonated with the very air around this formidable newcomer. The cold wind that had been biting at her skin now seemed to carry a different scent, an intoxicating mix of wild sage, damp earth, and something undeniably wolf, yet unlike any she had ever known from her own pack. It was a scent that stirred a forgotten corner of her soul, a primal recognition that whispered of kinship and belonging. Reese's gaze finally, inevitably locked onto hers. It was a moment that stretched into an eternity, obliterating the world around them. In those intense green eyes, Alara saw not the usual pity or scorn, not the fear or revulsion that had been her constant companions. Instead, there was a flicker of something else, something profound and unreadable, a recognition that pierced through her layers of pain and self-doubt. It was as if he saw not the wolfless girl, the exiled daughter, but something far deeper, something within her that even she barely dared to acknowledge. A tiny, fragile tendril of hope, something she thought had been utterly crushed moments before, unfurled within her. It was a dangerous, exhilarating feeling, a spark in the vast darkness of her despair. She wanted to look away, to hide from the intensity of his gaze, but she couldn't. His eyes held hers with an undeniable pull, a silent conversation passing between them that transcended words. A faint, almost predatory smirk played on his lips, hinting at a hidden wildness beneath his controlled exterior, a challenge to the established order. The silence that had fallen over the border grew heavy, laden with unspoken questions and simmering tension. Alpha Kale, who had stood rigid and commanding only moments before, now seemed to sag slightly, his icy blue eyes narrowed in confusion and barely concealed rage. The guards remained frozen, their hands still hovering near Alara, caught between their Alpha's last command and this new, unexpected authority. They could feel it too, the power emanating from Reese, a force unlike any they had encountered before. Reese took another slow, deliberate step forward, his boot falls silent on the pine needles. The movement was minimal, yet it commanded the attention of every soul present. He did not raise his voice, did not need to. His next words were spoken with a quiet conviction that resonated through the very earth, a declaration that felt as ancient and unyielding as the mountains themselves. His voice, calm and resonant, sliced through the strained atmosphere like a sharpened blade. "She is mine now," he stated, his voice carrying an undeniable authority that brooked no argument. Each word was a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and disbelief across the clearing. Alara flinched, not from fear, but from the sheer unexpectedness of his claim. Her mind struggled to comprehend. Mine? She belonged to no one, had been cast out, deemed worthless. Yet this powerful stranger spoke of possession, of belonging, in a way that felt less like ownership and more like protection. He paused for a heartbeat, his gaze never leaving Alara's, a subtle message passing between them, a promise perhaps, or a simple acknowledgement. Then his eyes flickered to Alpha Kyle, a brief, dismissive glance that contained more challenge than any roar. She belongs to the Shadowfen pack. The finality of his statement hung in the air, a definitive boundary drawn not just between packs, but between Alara's past and her unforeseen future. Alara felt a dizzying sensation, as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. One moment she was an outcast, a burden to be cast aside, and the next she was claimed. Not just claimed, but declared to belong to an entirely different pack, by an alpha king whose very presence radiated ancient, untamed power. It was a rescue, a defiance, a bewildering twist of fate that made her head swim. Her entire life had been defined by rejection, by being wolfless, by the bitter taste of her father's scorn. Now a man she had never seen before, an alpha of a rival territory, had chosen her. He had seen something, sensed something, that her own blood had denied. A fragile, desperate hope blossomed in her chest, intertwining with the lingering tendrils of fear. Could this be real? Could anyone truly want her, the girl deemed worthless? The warmth of his gaze, the quiet strength in his voice, suggested that he did. A stunned silence descended upon the border, heavier and more profound than before. The guards of the Blackwood pack, who had been ready to execute their alpha's cruel command, stood utterly motionless, their eyes darting between their own fuming alpha and the enigmatic Alpha Reese. Their fear was palpable, a cold sweat beading on their brows. They understood the gravity of this challenge, the direct affront to Alpha Kale's authority. This was not merely a rescue. It was an act of war, a blatant disregard for established pack law and territory. Alpha Kale's face, which had been a mask of cold finality moments earlier, twisted in a mixture of shock and fury. His jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle pulsed violently in his cheek. His icy blue eyes, usually so commanding, were now wide with disbelief, unable to comprehend this audacious challenge to his absolute power, this direct intervention in his long-planned act of vengeance against his daughter. He could not, would not accept it. The air crackled with the volatile tension of two dominant forces on the brink of collision. A tense silence held the air. Alpha Kale's fury vibrated, even as his guards released Alara's arm. Her eyes fixed on Reese Shadowfen, the enigmatic alpha who had rewritten her fate. He stood before her, a quiet, formidable presence, unlike Kael's aggression. His hand reached for hers, a gentle motion that made her flinch, a reflex from years of harsh touches. His fingers closed around hers as warm and firm, contrasting the icy dread she had carried. It was an invitation, a silent promise. Alara's breath caught. She searched his face for mockery, finding only calm intensity in his forest green eyes. Slowly he turned, his grip unwavering, leading her from the border. Each step left behind Blackwood lands and a lifetime of pain. Her father's bitter rage still hung in the air, a metallic tang that slowly receded. She felt the Blackwood guards' stares, but they no longer felt like a death sentence. Disorientation washed over her, a mix of relief and confusion. Could this sudden reprieve be real? Her fingers locked around Reese's hand, a desperate anchor. She moved as if dreaming, her feet barely registering the shift from hard ground to soft, mossy earth beneath the Shadowfen trees. The air changed, lighter, carrying damp earth and unseen wildflowers. Kael's oppressive silence lifted, replaced by rustling leaves and a distant stream. It was a world she had never known, a warmth chasing Blackwood's pervasive chill. Her internal landscape, a barren wasteland of fear, showed the faintest hint of green. She risked a glance back, half expecting her father to charge. But Alpha Kale stood rooted, a statue of impotent rage, his pack like frightened shadows behind him. His shock almost brought a smile, a forbidden thought that vanished. She was no longer his. Reese Shadowfen's words echoed. Deeper into Shadowfen, ancient oaks had roots gripping the earth, branches reaching skyward. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, painting shifting designs. The ground was soft and yielding, unlike her home's rough paths. A profound calm settled over Alara, an unfamiliar sensation. The constant anxiety that had lived within her began to dissipate. She felt a lightness, an easing of the burden. It was not joy, but a gentle quietude, a truce against self-doubt. Reese walked silently, his presence a steady anchor. He did not rush or pull. She followed, trusting his hand's warmth, his silent strength. This was different from anything she had known. No shouting, no threats, only a quiet progression into a softer, kinder world. Her wide eyes took in the landscape. No stark cabins here. Packed dwellings grew from the earth, nestled among trees or carved into hills. They blended seamlessly, their glow hinting at lives in harmony with nature. This was not a territory. It was an embrace. Then she saw the Shadowfen pack. They emerged from the trees and dens, drawn by their alpha. They lacked the rigid bearing of Blackwood wolves. Their forms were relaxed, movements fluid. Their eyes held welcoming curiosity, not the judging stares she expected. A young woman with autumn leaf hair smiled, her kindness almost bringing tears. A burly male wolf nodded in genuine acknowledgement. Children, wide-eyed, peered out, their smiles hesitant but real. There was no fear, no scorn, no disgust. Only a quiet, shared awareness. Alara felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. She had braced for whispers, averted gazes, the discomfort her wolflessness always evoked. Instead, she found gentle acceptance. These were not her father's wolves, driven by fear. Their strength rooted in understanding, in belonging. Her fingers tightened around Reese's hand, a silent question forming. How could they look at her without judgment? Was it his presence or something inherent to them, different from Blackwood? She wanted to ask, but words would not form. The emotional shift rendered her speechless. Reese, sensing her inquiry, turned his head. His gaze met hers, an ocean of understanding in his green eyes. He offered no verbal explanation. His glance was enough, a quiet reassurance that she was safe, that this place was different. The air, thick with Blackwood pine, here carried damp soil, honeysuckle, and running water. It filled her lungs, a refreshing balm after years of stale, fear-laden air. She noticed carvings on den entrances, tended flower beds, soft lanterns lit as dusk settled. This was not brute force, but quiet strength, communal warmth, a hidden magic resonating within Alara's unawakened core. The wolf's whisper, carving, clutched in her hand, felt vibrant, humming. She wondered if it sensed the shift. The scar on her cheek no longer felt so defining. As they walked, Shadowfen pack members offered soft, melodic greetings. No forced cheerfulness, just genuine, comforting welcome. Alara managed a tentative nod, her throat too tight. Tears stung her eyes, not from sorrow, but from bewilderment and a nascent hope. They passed a clearing where children played, their laughter echoing, pure and unburdened. She had never heard such joy in Blackwood, where children carried stern expectations. Here, freedom and lightness permeated existence, a world antithetical to her escaped past. Reese led her deeper along a winding path, away from communal areas. Lights softened, sounds muted. Pines flanked the narrowing path, their needles forming a fragrant carpet. She understood he sought solitude for her, a space to process the impossible day. Her heart, once a drum of fear, then hollow, now beat with a hesitant rhythm. Not fear, but a quickening, an unknown anticipation that was not unwelcome. She was weary of turmoil, yet a new energy stirred, resonating with the land's ancient peace. Finally, they reached a secluded den, nestled against a rise, hidden by moss and vines. It looked natural, not imposed. A faint, inviting light glowed within, a beacon of warmth. This was her refuge, her new beginning, a safety she had only dreamed of. Reese paused at the entrance, still clasping her hand. He turned, his gaze soft yet penetrating. He did not speak, letting silence hold their shared journey. Alara looked up, her gray eyes swimming with confusion, yielding to gratitude. A question formed, wanting to know why he chose her. As he shifted, ready to release her hand, his fingers brushed hers. A fleeting contact sent an electric jolt through Alara. It was a spark, small but undeniable, igniting a connection beyond Alpha and Pack. Her breath hitched. Her startled gaze flew to his. Their eyes locked, holding a silent, profound understanding. The warmth of the den was a soft embrace, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the Blackwood border. Alara felt the smooth, cool stone beneath her fingertips as she settled onto a thick, woven mat. Its earthy scent mingled with something sweet and unknown. A small fire crackled in a hearth built into the rock, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets around the circular chamber. Reese moved with an economy of motion, placing a clay mug of steaming, fragrant tea beside her. The herbal aroma filled her senses, calming a part of her she had not realized was still so deeply frayed. She lifted the mug, feeling the radiating heat seep into her palms, a small anchor in the storm of her displacement. Her eyes, still swollen from unshed tears, traced the intricate carvings on the den walls. They depicted swirling patterns of leaves, intertwining branches, and abstract shapes that somehow felt ancient and alive. This place, so different from the stark, functional brutality of her father's den, held a quiet power. It hummed with a resonance that settled deep within her bones, a gentle counterpoint to the chaotic thrum of her own racing heart. Reese sat across from her, his presence a steady anchor. He did not press her with questions, did not demand explanations. His gaze, those intense forest green eyes, simply rested on her, a silent invitation to simply be. For the first time in her life, Alara felt she might not have to justify her existence. She might not have to prove her worth every single breath. This unspoken acceptance was a balm on wounds she thought would never heal. A soft sigh escaped her lips, a sound she had held captive for so long. He gestured towards a small pile of objects near the fire. "These might interest you," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the quiet space. He offered no further explanation. Curiosity, a feeling long suppressed by fear, pricked at her. She reached for the top item, her fingers brushing against aged leather. It was a book, its cover thick and worn, bound with crude, strong twine. The pages within felt like dried leaves, fragile and smelling of old earth and forgotten stories. This was not a book of laws or battle strategies, like those she had occasionally glimpsed in her father's study. This book was filled with intricate drawings of wolves, not just their physical forms, but their spirits, their connections to the moon, the trees, the very pulse of the earth. She saw depictions of wolves with glowing eyes, wolves merging with shadows, wolves soaring on invisible currents of wind. One particular illustration caught her eye. A lone wolf, translucent and shimmering, standing beneath a massive ancient oak. Its gaze was serene, powerful, yet ethereal. Reese watched her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "The Shadowfen Pack believes in the wisdom of the old ways," he explained, his voice soft. "Our strength comes not just from teeth and claw, but from the deep currents that bind us to the world." He handed her another book, much smaller, almost a journal. Its cover was smooth, polished wood, inlaid with small, iridescent stones. "This one speaks of the hidden wolf," he continued, his eyes holding hers, "the spirit that lies dormant in some, waiting for the right moment, the right environment, to awaken." Alara's breath hitched. The hidden wolf, it was a phrase she had only dared to whisper in the darkest corners of her mind, a secret burden she carried. Her fingers tightened around the wooden wolf's whisper carving in her pocket, its familiar form a sudden comfort, a tangible link to the truth Reese seemed to understand without effort. She began to spend her days immersed in the text, sitting by the fire, the ancient words washing over her like a gentle tide. She read about ancestors who communicated with the very rocks, about wolves who could sense the turning of the seasons in their blood, about the subtle energy fields that connected every living thing. It was a world entirely new, yet it resonated with an instinctual knowing deep within her. The Blackwood Pack had taught her only fear and control. The Shadowfen text spoke of connection and release. Reese often joined her, not to instruct, but to observe, sometimes offering a single profound sentence that would crack open a new understanding. "The forest holds its own memory," he once said, watching her trace a symbol in one of the books. You only need to learn to listen. His words were not commands, but invitations. They did not dictate, they encouraged exploration. She started to venture outside the den, timid at first, then with growing confidence. The Shadowfen lands were breathtaking, a vibrant tapestry of ancient oaks draped with moss, winding rivers that sang as they flowed over smooth stones, and misty fens that shimmered with an otherworldly light. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, sweet wildflowers, and the clean, invigorating smell of pine. It was alive, teeming with unseen energies. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, every shift in the wind felt like a message. She would close her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to discern the subtle whispers the book spoke of. The wolf's whisper carving was always clutched in her hand, its smooth, cool surface a constant reminder of the potential she guarded. She felt the ground beneath her feet differently here, a solid, grounding presence that seemed to pulse with a slow, steady beat. One afternoon, exploring a small clearing bathed in sunlight, Alara felt a peculiar sensation. It began as a faint, thrumming pulse, deep in her chest, right beneath her sternum. It was not her heartbeat, but something else, something deeper, more resonant. It felt like a low vibration. A forgotten chord struck within her. The air around her seemed to shimmer, the leaves on the trees vibrating in response. A shiver, not of cold but of pure energy, ran down her spine. She looked around, her eyes wide, searching for a source. Was it the wind? A hidden stream? But the feeling was distinctly within her, yet also connected to the vibrant life around her. It intensified when Reese was near. When he walked beside her, guiding her through the winding paths, the thrumming grew stronger, a warm, insistent current flowing through her veins. It was as if his very presence ignited something long dormant inside her. One evening, a soft rain began to fall, pattering gently on the den roof. Alara sat by the fire, reading from the small wooden journal about the subtle energies of the moon and stars, and how they influenced the hidden wolf. Reese was across from her, sharpening a hunting knife with a rhythmic, quiet scrape. The only sounds were the rain, the fire, and the soft rasp of stone on metal. "Fear can be a cage," Reese said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. He looked up, his green eyes meeting hers. "But it can also be the catalyst. What we hide, what we fear most about ourselves, often holds our greatest power." Alara's heart gave a lurch. His words pierced through the layers of self-doubt and shame she had worn for so long. She thought of her father, of his scorn, his fear of her perceived weakness. She thought of the wolf's whisper carving, hidden away, a symbol of the very thing her father rejected. What if Reese was right? What if her lack of an obvious wolf form was not a weakness, but a different kind of strength? The thrumming in her chest intensified, spreading through her limbs, making her fingers tingle. It was a sensation of burgeoning energy, a rising tide within her. She felt a strange lightness, as if the burden of her past was beginning to lift, replaced by a nascent excitement. The air in the den suddenly felt charged, electric. Her senses sharpened. She could almost taste the rain on the wind, hear the individual drops hitting the leaves outside. Reese set down his knife, his gaze fixed on her. There was an intensity in his eyes she had not seen before, an almost predatory focus, yet it was not threatening. It felt like recognition. He spoke again, his voice a low, melodic hum. "Every being has a truth that resonates with the world. Yours is ancient, Alara. It is simply waiting for you to see it." His words were a key, turning a lock she didn't even realize existed within her. A profound sense of understanding, of knowing bloomed in her chest, warm and expanding. She felt a sudden, irresistible pull to look away, to glance towards the shadowy corner of the den, beside the entrance. And there it was. It was not solid, not truly visible, but a shimmering, translucent form. A wolf. Larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its fur a smoky gray, almost ethereal, blending with the shadows. Its eyes, though indistinct, held a profound, ancient wisdom, the kind she had only imagined in the oldest tales. It stood silently, observing her, its presence radiating a calm, immense power. There was no growl, no movement, only its unwavering gaze, holding hers for a breath-stopping moment. The thrumming within Alara became a roar, not of sound but of pure, raw energy. Her breath hitched in her throat, catching, unwilling to release. Her fingers locked around the wolf's whisper carving, clutching it so tightly her knuckles whitened. This was not a dream, not a trick of the light. This was real. This was the hidden wolf, the forbidden wolf, her wolf. It was everything she had been told she was not, everything she had been punished for not being. A wave of emotion so potent it threatened to overwhelm her, washed over Alara. Fear mixed with awe, disbelief with a nascent, exhilarating surge of power. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of the spectral wolf. It was a release, a breaking of a dam that had held back a lifetime of pain and longing. This was the validation she had craved, the proof she had yearned for, now manifest before her very eyes. She quickly blinked, trying to clear her vision, to focus, to truly see the magnificent creature. But as her eyes cleared, the wolf was gone, vanished back into the shadows from which it had appeared. It left behind only a lingering scent of pine and something wild, untamed, primal. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the residual thrumming in her body. Overwhelmed by the vision, Elara looked to Rhys, who met her gaze with a knowing smile, his eyes reflecting the deep understanding that she was finally seeing what he had always known. Rhys's knowing smile promised understanding, an assurance that the impossible might be near. Elara carried that promise into the Shadowfen lands, seeking secluded glades where ancient oaks stood. She spent mornings there, palms pressed to cool earth, trying to feel the dormant thrum within. Her breath caught, a desperate gasp, finding only emptiness where her wolf should be. Rhys's certainty, his unseen knowing, kept her persisting. She closed her eyes, willing herself to join the rustling leaves, the river's murmur, the earth's pulse. She tried to pull the wolf's spectral vision from memory into waking light. Damp earth and pine filled her lungs with each slow breath. She imagined roots growing from her feet, anchoring her, drawing strength from the land's ancient magic. She saw a silver thread, shimmering, connecting her to the forest core. It was painstaking work, often draining her, leaving her mind tangled with frustration and fragile hope. Rhys sometimes found her there, a silent presence at the clearing's edge. He watched with unnerving calm, never interrupting. His wild, grounding scent reached her, a reminder she was not alone in this quest. Some days she felt nothing, a hollow echo. Other times, a warmth bloomed in her chest, an internal pulse resonating with Shadowfen's quiet power. A lightness filled her limbs, a heightened awareness of air and shadow. It was not a roaring power, but a quiet, insistent hum, a forgotten melody returning. She practiced daily, for hours, pushing past weariness, driven by a longing she could not deny. She yearned to feel whole, to understand the truth Rhys saw in her. One crisp afternoon near a mossy stone, Elara felt energy tendrils from the earth. A sudden, subtle shift occurred. A withered leaf in a spiderweb above her began to glow with faint, silvery light. Her eyes snapped open, a gasp catching. The glow pulsed, then faded, leaving the leaf dry. Had she imagined it? Her fingers trembled with fear and exhilaration. This felt real. Rhys emerged, his gaze finding the spot where she had looked. He said nothing, but a slow, knowing smile confirmed her experience. His subtle validation spoke volumes. From then, manifestations grew more frequent, more tangible. Walking through pack gardens, wilted flowers perked up, their petals unfurling as she passed. A sweet fragrance filled the air, drawing attention. Thomas, the elder herbalist, watched Elara approach struggling moon petal blossoms. She knelt, fingers brushing the earth, and the pale petals expanded, their inner light brightening. Thomas's wise eyes widened in awe. He looked from Elara to the flowers, a reverence she had never known. She expected fear, judgment, scorn. Instead, she found wonder. Sarah, a young mother wary of the Blackwood outsider, once saw Elara soothe a crying child. The inconsolable child quieted instantly, a faint glow emanating from Alara's hand as she stroked its forehead. It was a comforting warmth, a subtle magic bringing peace. Sarah's expression softened, a silent message of trust passing between them. The Shadowfen pack, used to their land's mystical ways, did not fear Alara's gifts. They revered them, seeing them as part of their territory's hidden power. This acceptance nourished Alara's spirit. The ache of isolation receded, replaced by belonging. She smiled more, a genuine, unburdened smile reaching her storm-gray eyes. Her father's disapproval, the weight of her past, still lingered but no longer defined her. She was Alara, part of the Shadowfen, discovering her unique strength. Reese watched her progress, making her heart flutter, a new sensation she learned to name. He encouraged her to explore, to push boundaries. He taught her the forest's subtle energies, the trees' whispers, the river's language. On long walks through misty fens, his easy stride and comforting presence anchored her. He spoke of balance, of interconnectedness, of the wolfish spirit, a core essence manifesting in many ways. During these walks, their hands often brushed, a fleeting contact sending a jolt of warmth through Alara, acknowledging their growing intimacy. One evening, as the moon cast long shadows across their clearing, Reese reached out. His fingers gently traced the faint scar along her left cheekbone. It was a tender, unexpected gesture. Alara caught her breath. His light touch sent shivers down her spine. A mark of resilience, he murmured, his voice a low, resonant hum. Not weakness. His forest green eyes, usually guarded, held a vulnerability she had not seen, a deep affection mirroring her own heart's feelings. She met his gaze, unable to look away. Unspoken words hung heavy in the cool air, thick with damp earth and his wild essence. Her fingers tightened around the wolf's whisper carving, hidden, a reminder of the wolf he knew she carried. They spoke for hours, not always with words. Shared silences grew comfortable, filled with understanding, passed through gazes, posture shifts, their quiet, unison breathing. He shared stories of his pack, of ancient ways. She listened, mesmerized, feeling a profound connection to his world. The fear that was her constant companion receded, replaced by trust, unwavering faith in Reese. Her heart quickened near him, a joyful flutter, exhilarating and frightening. She who knew only rejection now received profound attention, gentle protection. One afternoon by the river, skipping stones, Alara stumbled. Reese's hand shot out, steadying her. His grip was firm, reassuring. For a moment, their hands stayed clasped. A warmth spread through her, a sense of belonging so complete it brought tears to her eyes. He did not release her hand. His thumb gently stroked it, a tender gesture, speaking volumes. In that instant, all unspoken longing found its anchor. Her past fell away, her father's cruel words, the Blackwood Pack's isolating silence, fading to hazy memory. Here, with Reese, she was seen. She was cherished. Her wolf was not a burden, but a power, a gift. She had found her voice, not just in her power's subtle manifestations, but in quiet confidence blooming within her. She was no longer the fragile, wolf-less girl banished from home. She was Alara, on the precipice of her true potential, embraced by a love she never dreamed of. Standing with Reese, her hand finding his, she felt a surge of strength and belonging, ready to face anything. The crisp mountain air of Shadowfen no longer carried the sting of exile for Alara. It tasted of belonging, of pine needles and damp earth, a scent now woven into the very fabric of her being. She stood beside Alpha Reese, her silhouette etched against the vibrant sunset, a quiet strength radiating from her slender frame. Her mousy brown hair, once a symbol of her unnoticed existence, now gleamed with hidden fire as the evening light caught it. This was not the girl who had trembled at the border. This was a woman forged in fire, her stormy gray eyes holding a depth that spoke of ancient wisdom and newly found power. She felt the thrum of her wolf, a vibrant, living entity within her, a constant, comforting presence that whispered tales of the forest and the sky. It was a power that flowed through her veins, warm and potent, utterly hers. The faint scar along her left cheekbone, once a reminder of perceived weakness, now felt like a badge of resilience. She had carried it through the darkest valleys, and it had witnessed her rise. Reese stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling currents of her past. His hand, warm and calloused, found hers, a familiar comfort that sent a tremor of contentment through her. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise of unbreakable connection. The Shadowfen pack moved below them, their laughter echoing up the slopes, a joyful sound Alara had once believed was forbidden to her. She watched them, her heart expanding with an unfamiliar warmth, a love that was both fierce and tender. She remembered the cold, judging glances of the Blackwood pack, the constant tension that had coiled in her stomach. Now here there was only acceptance, a quiet reverence for the strength she had finally embraced. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the feeling of the wind on her face, carrying the distant scent of the river and the earthy aroma of the ancient oaks. Her wolf stirred, a silent affirmation, a deep primal purr of satisfaction. It was no longer a hidden secret, a source of fear, but a celebrated part of her soul. She remembered the agonizing uncertainty, the days she had spent whispering to the wolf's whisper carving, begging for a sign. Now the carving sat on a small shelf in her den, a cherished memory, its purpose fulfilled. Her wolf no longer needed a symbol, it lived and breathed within her. The world had shifted, not just around her, but deep inside. The tales of the wolf-hearted Alpha's daughter, they began as whispers. Travelers moving between territories carried the stories of a young woman, once cast out, who had found her true power within the Shadowfen pack. They spoke of her unique connection to the land, her intuitive understanding of the ancient ways, and the quiet authority that resonated in her every movement. These were not the bombastic claims of a conquering alpha, but the humble observations of those who had witnessed something profound. The stories traveled, reaching even the furthest corners of the Blackwood lands. Alpha Kale, still ruling with an iron grip, heard the murmurs. He dismissed them at first, a flick of his powerful hand, a snort of derision. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent, carried on the very wind that now bore the scent of Alara's newfound strength. He heard how she walked among the oldest trees, how her touch seemed to soothe the wild creatures, how her voice, once timid, now carried a strange, compelling resonance that moved the hearts of the Shadowfen wolves. Each tale, innocent in its telling, was a subtle challenge to his tyrannical rule. His rigid beliefs, once unshakable, began to show hairline fractures. He had always preached purity and brute strength, had cast out his own daughter for what he perceived as weakness. Now the world was speaking of a different kind of power, one that had blossomed from a place he had deemed barren. He would find himself pacing his den at night, the silence of his fortress amplified by the echoes of these unsettling stories. He would remember Alara's stormy gray eyes, eyes that had always held a depth he could not fathom, a truth he had refused to see. Alara, however, lived in the present, her past a shadow that no longer clung to her heels. She found true peace in the misty fens and winding rivers of Shadowfen. The scent of wildflowers and damp moss filled her senses, a balm to her soul. She spent her days learning, exploring, and simply being. Her connection with Reese deepened with each passing sunrise. Their bond was a tapestry woven from shared glances, silent understandings, in the unspoken language of two souls recognizing their other half. He would watch her, a quiet smile playing on his lips, his eyes reflecting the profound joy he found in her transformation. She remembered the day she had felt his fingers brush hers at the border, the electric jolt that had promised a connection beyond the physical. Now that connection was the very air she breathed. His calm, resonant voice was her anchor, his unwavering belief her foundation. She would often find herself tracing the lines of his hand, marveling at the strength and tenderness it held. She realized then that love was not about ownership or control, as her father believed, but about seeing, truly seeing another soul and offering sanctuary. The Shadowfen pack embraced her not as an outcast, but as a valued member, a unique strength within their own. They saw her quiet determination, her gentle spirit, and the immense power that had blossomed under Reese's protection. She was no longer defined by her father's rejection, but by her own inherent worth, a worth that Reese had always sensed. She felt the pulse of the pack, a collective heartbeat that resonated with her own, a harmony she had craved her entire life. Her past pain, the sharp ache of her father's cruelty, the sting of banishment, had not vanished. Instead, it had transformed. It was no longer a burden, but a wellspring of empathy, a reminder of the resilience forged within her. Here, it was a deep, quiet knowledge that allowed her to understand the fears of others, to offer comfort where once she had only sought it. Her journey had been arduous, marked by tears and profound loneliness, but every step had led her here. Her destiny, once a bleak path stretching into an unknown exile, had been irrevocably rewritten. It had been rewritten not just by the intervention of Alpha Reese, but by her own courage to embrace the wolf within. The wolf she had always known was there. She had walked through the fire of rejection and emerged not burned, but purified, stronger, and more whole than she had ever dared to dream. The wolf's whisper carving, now an ornament, symbolized the journey from silent yearning to triumphant roar. Under the warm, watchful gaze of Alpha Reese, Ilara looked out over her new pack. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the ancient forest. She took a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filling her lungs, a sense of profound belonging settling deep within her bones. Her heart was full, overflowing with a quiet, vibrant joy she had once thought impossible. She knew she had found her true home, her rightful place in the world, forever free from the shadows of her past. What would you have done? One line in the comments, let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it is a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you do not miss it.